Hey guys, VIPs, welcome into the Setup DS Domination Station portion of the NFL Rundown Week 14. I'm your buddy Choppadong. It's been a couple of days since I've talked to you. Hopefully, you have a player pool that you have set up in your own mind. And today I'm going to throw a little curveball at you. I'm going to show you how to kind of go through the Domination Station, set it up using the Millie Maker article. The Shark Chronicles article is probably the best thing if you're building big multi-entry, big GPP stacks. Probably the best article you can read all week long. We'll come back later. We'll do a little bit of comparison with the cheat sheets, see how our player pools line up. But most importantly, we need to dive into the Shark Chronicles and we need to think. We need to put thinking caps on and think critically as we walk through this article and think about how we want to set up the domination station. I would recommend grabbing a notebook and a pen and paper while you're reading this article so that you can then understand what you need to target when you get to the domination station. Don't rely on your memory. Your memory will burn you, man. Don't rely on your memory to get everything down cold. So as we walk through, and it doesn't take long, I would recommend you read this article through at least a couple of times and read the finer points of it if you're new to the article. But if you've read it a few times, a lot of this stuff doesn't necessarily change. I would come down a little bit and notice that the quarterbacks that fit the bill, we're looking for favored quarterbacks, certain spreads, et cetera, over the course of the 2020 season. Favorite QBs, 78% of the Millie Maker lineups. Okay, so we're looking for favored QBs, just like cash games. Tennessee, which one's favored? Well, Tennessee, so Tannehill. But if you notice, he's telling you that either Derrick Henry's going to go bonkers or Tannehill's going to throw for multiple TDs. So I would, if I used Derrick Henry in my cash games because I felt like he was the more frequent producer in this game, then I would definitely fade him in my GPPs and put Tannehill with Corey Davis, AJ Brown, whatever. Jonnu Smith if he's back. Ferkser, you want to be a week early. That Ferkser call last week might pay off this week. I'm telling you that right now. I would throw him into a certain percentage of my lineup, 10, 20%, something small, but I would throw him in there. And you get these day early calls, week early calls all the time, and they pan out. And everyone goes, well, where was I last week? I should have been on it this week. I hear that too much. That's a thing. And you should probably play for that to happen this week in your GPP lineups when the rest of the world is going to say, well, that didn't work last week. I'm out of there. And then boom, Jonnu Smith was a decoy. Ferkser gets the snaps. And the next thing you know, Ferkser gets the tutty. That's all you need for him to pay off big dividends and be low owned in a Tannehill stack if Tannehill also has a great day because the Henry production wasn't panning out. Whatever gets you different in those big multi-entry GPPs. Green Bay versus Detroit, obviously Green Bay stacked up with Rodgers and his receivers. Minnesota, Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is a home favorite. So Brady, you can run Brady naked. He spreads the ball out a ton. You can run him with any of his pass catchers. Think about this. Does Ronald Jones or Leonard Fournette catch more passes? That's the running back you would pair with Brady and zero out the other one. Right? You might run the other one in some more contrarian stacks as a one-off, but you're going to keep the pass catcher. And I'm not going to tell you which one it is. It's up to you to find out. But that you would need to keep the pass catcher correlated with Brady in 10, 20% of your Brady stacks, and then run all those receivers like Gronk and all the Antonio Brown, all the other guys out there, because Brady spreads that ball out. It's very easy for Brady to have a good day and have some of the others have good days too in big game stacks. Now, as just a QB wide receiver stack, I don't know that I would do that because you're not going to oftentimes get a big monster Tyreek Hill type of game out of a Brady receiver. It can happen, but he spreads the ball out a ton. Kansas City and Mahomes, that should be Tyreek and Kelsey, maybe a little CEH, something like that. There's not a lot, Sammy Watkins, there's not a lot else you can mix and match with there, but you're going to run that back with Thielen and Jefferson, if not both, and hope for a big shootout. New York Jets and Seattle, read this blurb. Russell with the down week, but it sets up very, very well for him this week. So you might want to be alone with him using both Lockett and DK Metcalf. Maybe David Moore slides into your thought process. Chris Carson had a couple TD pass catches early in the year. Maybe he slides into it. Now, again, I'm not talking about every single stack. I'm talking about mixing and matching, and I'll show you how to set that up in the domination station. We're probably headed for 2 videos, 2 parts to this one, just so you know. But running backs, games that fit the bill, again, are favored, key spreads, etc. Who's favored? Well, he's calling for Aaron Jones. I would always throw a little Jamal Williams in there with it. Now, again, if I'm using Aaron Jones in, say, 5 or 6 lineups, How many would I put Jamal Williams in? I don't know, like 2? Like a third of what I would put Aaron Jones in. Aaron Jones has the talent, there's no doubt, but you could get lucky. Again, I'm talking nickels. I'm not talking about some 100-man league. I'm talking about 100,000-man GPPs where you need something freaky to happen. Take that slightly contrarian twist. You know that's a committee. Use it against the rest of the field and put a little bit of the secondary guy in your stacks. That's going to help you be different in case that's what goes off. Dallas and Cincinnati, Zeke's on great paper, but if he's out, Tony Pollard. What if Zeke's a decoy? I mean, it's possible, right? It's not. I mean, it's also possible that Jerry Jones says, I paid this bastard way too much money and I'm going to feed him this week. And he has a great game. But if he's truly questionable and truly a little bit dinged up, then maybe Tony Pollard gets some run. Maybe Tony Pollard, he looked like the faster running back a couple of weeks ago anyway, broke a big, long 30, 40-yard. What if that one goes for 60 and a score? Again, stranger things have happened to win the millies. Stranger things have happened to win the nickels. Things like this need to break for you, and you need a couple of these in your lineups here and there in case that does happen. Cincinnati or Kansas City against Miami again. It's Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I wouldn't probably run Le'Veon Bell there, but you see where I'm going with the mentality here. Hopefully, Indianapolis. The minute he started Taylor, the minute Burns started talking Taylor, where'd my mind go? Hines. Got down to the end here. Of course, he mentioned Hines too, but that's another one of those. Maybe that's a 50-50 type of split where you'd run Hines in 50% of your Indianapolis lineups. So you're going to include both in your player pool. Would you run it back with somebody like an Aguilar? I don't know. That's up to you. But I'm going to tell you that if you're focused on these running backs, because this is a situation that finds its way into the millie, I'm also including Hines in that discussion. New Orleans, the Murray versus Kamara discussion was interesting. So you got some Kamara in there. Kamara can break a slate, any slate, if he's given the opportunity. Hasn't been given the opportunity lately, but maybe there are showing signs of Taysom Hill settling in a little bit and Kamara getting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pair them both up. I'll pair them up a little bit of Michael Thomas, but I'm putting Taysom Hill in some lineups with Kamara. Why? Because a pass catching back helps both. And Taysom Hill runs in 2 scores. Kamara breaks one for 30 and a touchdown. Maybe you're off to something unique and you're off and running on something when everybody else is focused on other offenses. This is how you need to think to get yourself into position in these GPPs to get in that lower ownership scenario. You can use higher owned players, but if you correlate the right ones together, you can get low owned combinations of those stud players. Denver and Carolina, of course, Gordon and Mike Davis seems to fit. Wide receivers, big games. You want to run it back with MJJ, be my guest, but you're going to be using some Green Bay, maybe some Indianapolis, some Atlanta and the Chargers. That's interesting. You want to lean on the favored side of this. So that brings Keenan Allen and Mike Williams into play, maybe some Hunter Henry into play. Minnesota and Tampa Bay, we already talked about that. If you're running a lot of Tampa Bay and Brady stacks, you're going to run that back with Thielen and Jefferson all day long. Seattle, you might run it back with a Crowder, maybe a Brashard Perryman, something like that. But the bottom line is you're mostly going to be focused on the Seattle side in that game. Down to Tennessee, same diff. Dallas and Seattle, that's a Dalton Schultz day, baby. He just told you right here. He doesn't even need to mention the name. He just told you. Washington and San Francisco. San Francisco's favorite. I don't know who their tight end is, but he's in a good spot. Tennessee and Jacksonville. Tennessee's tight end. There's your Ferkser call. Yes, Jonnu Smith doesn't wear the Q tag this week or whatever I noticed, but I'm not going to be banking on that. I'm going to throw a little Ferkser in there with him, and we're going to play both in a Tannehill stack. Not both tight ends, but both players. Well, some Jonnu Smith, some Ferkser, whatever, because like I said, I've heard the week early calls way, way too often in my career. Houston versus Chicago, Houston favorite. That's an Aikens situation, of course. Minnesota, Tampa Bay favorite. That's Gronk, baby. Defenses to target. You're going to uncheck, put some Denver in there, some Chicago in there, whatever. Okay, so if you've done that, you can go check the cheat sheets from there and figure out how you're going to select your player pool. But I've already done some of it for us. What I do in the DS is I come through and I'm going to set up these rules in a minute, but I'm looking at the games and whatnot, looking at stacks. Of course, I wrote those down, hopefully, like your Tannehill stacks, Rodgers stacks, Brady stacks, run a little bit of him naked, run a little bit of him game stacked, whatever, in case the game shoots out. I wouldn't have, say 10 stacks and have them all be game stacked. I would break that up into, say, 6 or 7 team stacks and then 3 or 4 game stacks, something like that. I'm setting up the domination station like this. If you saw the flip-flop in the Millie Maker article, running backs are not necessarily in the winning lineups as much these last few weeks. It's flipped back to the wide receivers some. So shift your percentages. Put a little tight end in there, put some wide receiver in there up to 60, 70% or so. Keep your running backs at 50%, 60%, whatever, and let it start open up the game. For all the weeks of this year so far, I've been running mostly running backs in my flex because that's what's been winning the millie, and I'm trying to mirror what's winning in the millie, right? You could be contrarian and put receivers in there beforehand, but you're being a little bit suboptimal. Now it's more optimal, so put them in there. Tournament mode, 4 unique players. Run that baby wide ass open. Server setting, and then a little bit of randomness. And that's really all I've done to set up the beginning. I don't use all these sliders and crap. That's just a mess. You can do it if you want to. If it's part of your process, by all means, go for it. It's just not part of mine. Okay? That's all I'm saying. And I'm unchecking the boxes. I'm checking back all the players that I want. I go through quarterback, running back, wide receiver, etc. I'm not messing with exposures yet. Once I've got my player pool selected, now I'm going to come back up here. I'm going to start messing with my settings. And I'm going to take the correlated settings and realize that if I make, say I have 50 lineups selected with specific stacks, but I want to run 60 or 75 or 80 lineups or more, this default universal rule is going to take over for all those extras that I didn't already designate. That's what it's for. So you don't have to include, say, Taysom Hill stacks in your rules settings if you don't want to. And as long as you put, say, a 5% minimum on him, he'll show up stacked with a wide receiver or a tight end. Now, you're going to have to set it to get him stacked with Kamara. Because if you just rely on the universal rule, he won't be stacked with a running back. You can do 1 or 2 secondary stacks. I encourage you to play around with that. You can uncheck some of these boxes or check them. That's finer tuning down the road, but for now, don't put too many restrictions on the machine. Let it run as wide open. Putting 2 stacks in there is going to make it run a little more restricted. Let's see if we can get those lineups out first and then start clamping it down each additional run, okay? So Aaron Rodgers, 8 team stacks, right? Between 1 and 3 players, I should say between 1 and 2. And I set some percentages, like not going to be a lot of Aaron Jones in there. If you think about the game and the way the game's going to go, not very often is Aaron Jones going to throw for, or Aaron Rodgers going to throw for, 400 yards and 5 touchdowns and have Aaron Jones be much of a factor in that game. It can happen some, but it's not going to happen most of the time. That's when you want your Lazards, your Adams, your Scantlings, Tanyans, whatever, right? But there is a small chance it could happen, true. But it's just generally not going to. So get that guy out of there and keep him down to a minimum percentage. Let some of these other guys in there. If you don't want to see a lot of Devontae Adams, you're afraid he's going to be chalky, then cut him down to 50% of those stacks. And he'll only be in 4 of those 8 lineups that you selected. If you like Aaron Rodgers more than I do, put him in 12 lineups. Put him in 20 lineups. I don't give a shit what you do. This is up to you to decide how you're going to fine-tune things. I'm just showing you the basics. Come back with 4, about half as many, and do a game stack with those. And that's going to include the Marvin Jones Jr.'s, the Hawkinsons. I just left them full. But again, I cut down the Aaron Jones and cut down the Jamal Williams situations. Russell Wilson, 6 lineups there. A couple of game stack lineups, right? Mostly Metcalf and Lockett. Cut down the Carson and run some David Moore. I hope David Moore shows up in a lot of these lineups because he's going to be the lowest owned of the 3 receivers. Come down here and game stack it a little bit. Run it back with some Crowder and some Perryman in a few situations. Same with Mahomes. Run it back with a few scenarios of Parker, Gesicki, whatever. But open this thing up and start thinking. Now, Kyler Murray's better off naked because he rushes in touchdowns when he's healthy. If he's having a monster game, he's probably ran in a couple of scores. To me, I cut him down to just one player. He doesn't spread the ball around so much that they're all going to have big games together. Maybe it's an Isabella night. Maybe it's a Hopkins night. I don't really know. And I'm not running him in a ton of stacks. I'm going to come back and run a separate batch of just him in about 10 lineups naked and hope that that's the situation that pans out. That's me personally. And I'm going to use that aside from the DS. Okay? Let me pause this video and come back. Actually, let me pound through these. Tannehill, 8 lineups, 5 Brady lineups, but I've also got some Brady game stacks because I think this game could really go off with Minnesota. But notice I didn't include a lot of Dalvin Cook in there. It's mostly the receivers running back on these guys, okay? So, and then Taysom Hill in 4 lineups, with a lot of Kamara, a little bit of Thomas, a little bit of Emmanuel Sanders, but hopefully a lot of Kamara. And I'm prepared to adjust what I need to in boosting projections or putting minimums on him to get him in there a little bit more often. Now I'm going to pause. I'll upload this video. I'll come back and do part 2, and we'll maybe make some tweaks and some adjustments. But you've got the basic setup of this video and how to run this thing in terms of stacking and rules and player pools and all that good stuff.